Canada and work here. And our mission is to help nonprofits use technology, and that's why we're doing this. We do this through different ways. We have a software donations program where nonprofits, charities, libraries can get access to technology for really cheap. There's a link here, you can follow it, and you can see your organization is eligible if you're a nonprofit or a charity or library. We also curate and gather tech resources for nonprofits. We have a blog, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, or Meetup. That's how most of you heard about this. So TechSoup Canada is part of a global network. We have in more than 60 countries like South Africa, Kenya, Italy, USA, Canada. We help a lot of nonprofits. We ourselves are tiny little nonprofits. We're not that small, we're 9 of us. We work in the corner office over here. We work hard. And we're a program of the Center for Social Innovation. That's where you are now. This is the space here. So just where you are, this is Net Tuesday. It's part of the Net Square. Net Square tries to plan events that combine technology and social impact. There's a lot of local events everywhere. In Canada, there's in Toronto, Mississauga, Montreal, Vancouver. If you're interested in hosting your own Net Square group, you can talk to us. We can hook you up. So here are some nonprofit technology events that could be useful for you. Later this week we have a webinar on analytics for your nonprofit's website that you might find useful. There's a link you can register on the website. This stuff will be available after. Next month as well, similar to this, we have a content marketing for nonprofits. Here, it's gonna be cool. So just some simple logistical stuff. The password, the network, the Wi-Fi is CSI guests. You can connect, there's no password required, it's free. Follow us on, this is the hashtag for this event. Hashtag Nets2TO. We're gonna be like trending. So all the recordings and the slides will be available after the event, so don't stress. And there's food, so eat it. We got it for you. Please. So we're gonna do a little icebreaker. It'll be short. So just tell us. I want you to talk to your neighbor, someone you don't know, hopefully, someone that's sitting here, or maybe not. Tell them your name, what your organization is, and regarding this event, what type of graphics do you currently create in your nonprofits? So, be human. Hi. People, friends, no problem. Okay, so thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed that. You obviously did. So today, while you're here, we have Joyce, who's going to be our speaker. She's right there, trying to hide. So she's the communication lead at Tech Canada. She has over 6 years working experience in non-profits. She's really good at it. She has a background in fine arts and business. You can follow her on Twitter. She's really popular on the internet.
Thank you.
And she's going to talk to you about graphic hacks. So welcome, Joyce.
All right, so I want to thank all of you guys for coming out because I know it's a beautiful day, and we've been like dreading all the rain and all the cold weather, so you really skipped that to come here, so I really appreciate that. So before I get started, I wanted to give you some of the background, because I know a few of you have nonprofit working experience, but some of you may just work with nonprofits or are just interested in some of the tips we have. So to really make sure that we're all on one level playing field, I want to start off by saying that these are hacks for a reason. They're not best practices, so if you take these, you go to a designer and say, hey, look at these tips, they will freak out because they're not industry standards. But as scrappy nonprofit professionals, we know that we're not always equipped with the right tools or the right talent, but that doesn't stop us from doing our job. So a lot of the things in this presentation is geared towards that mind frame, that you don't have the right talent, you don't have the right tools. We're starting from, you are a day-to-day nonprofit staff, you don't even have admin rights on your computer, so you can't install fonts, you can't install even open source programs, and maybe you have an IT person, maybe you don't, but in either case, you can't get someone to install things on your computer. So while there are amazing programs out there, I find that even coming from a nonprofit background, they don't always help. Someone saying, oh, you should just download and install Git and you're good to go. From a nonprofit perspective, if my hands are tied, that doesn't help me. So what are you left with? You're left with your office programs. And when you need to create an annual report, or just a donor's report, or a survey, or case or support, you can't tell your donors, oh, sorry, I can't install programs, so now it looks really bad. You have to make do with what you have. So when it comes to graphic design, a lot of nonprofits, they have one of two reactions. So this is for people who may not be familiar with the concept or are designers themselves. The first assumption is that it can't be done unless you're a professional, which is an assumption, so we'll leave that on the table. The next one is that graphic design is not important. So I will address both of those. So the first one is it has to be done by a professional. If you don't have the budget for it, if you don't have internal talent, it's okay. Just produce materials. People will forgive us because we don't have the right budget or the right talent. And while your supporters will definitely be forgiving, and they will still stick with you and support you, unfortunately, that's not a really good excuse. Graphic design can be for everyone. You just need to learn where to start and start applying the right principles. So that will be addressed throughout this entire presentation. So I'm going to address that second assumption where graphic design is not important. Obviously, I'm here, so I do think it's really important, and you're here as well. So I don't need to convince you, but you might have to convince your colleague, your manager, or your board to just give you more time to make sure your piece is polished. Or when you're taking feedback from your team and they don't really want to have feedback on the design of a piece, you can use these things to help them change their mind. There are many, many factors that will explain why graphic design is important, but the key three things is one, it makes your content digestible. Two, it helps people remember your brand or your nonprofit. And the third one is it actually helps build your brand personality. So these are like three concepts. What do they really mean? I'll show you some examples. Thank you. It makes your content digestible. A lot of people pit graphic design versus content. If your content is quality content, it doesn't matter what the design is. People will read it, people will find it, they'll look for it, and you're fine. While that is true for some cases, if you, as a nonprofit, you want to reach as many people as possible, you want to educate, you want to equip people, unfortunately appealing to the minority of people who would actually take time to research and find their materials is not always the right strategy. you want to make sure your content can reach as many people as possible, and graphic design can help you do that. So here I have 2 examples, and we believe in not shaming nonprofits, but we also believe that you need to learn from your peers. So I took 2 real examples. These are not things I made up. I found them, I sanitized them, so I removed the charities' names, but these are things that are live right now. We have an example of 2 Canadian health charities. Their content is just general health best practices, or just more information about their cause. So one example, I also want to premise by saying that these are not examples of like the best graphic design out there. This is to help you start getting into the mindset that if you're not a graphic design professional, how can you start thinking about design? So not saying that these are perfect examples, but I will tell you right now that one is definitely better designed than the other. So I'll actually survey the room. Which one do you think it is? Is it Canadian Health Charity number 1 or number 2?
Are we voting?
If you want. Oh, actually, that might be too loud for our live stream audience. But you can just put up your hand. What do you think? Less? 1? Yeah? 1? Do you want to share your reasons?
No.
People. A lot of text on the page.
And we will go through a lot of more elements later. And like the key to graphic design, this might sound really subjective, but an important rule to follow is that if you are doing it right, people won't think you're doing anything at all. And that applies for a lot of things, but especially in graphic design. So Les, you did touch on a lot of, well, you touched on one of the many things that this example is doing right. Later on I'll explain this concept, but this one actually embodies the visual concept of a path, a visual path. So even though having images are great, this particular image made it very effective. She's copying into her elbow, which makes your eye lead into this header. It breaks it off with a new color, so your eye continues to go. It has nice line breaks, and it goes into bullet points, so then your eye can easily flow down the article, and eventually, hopefully, end the article. This one, there's nothing really wrong with it. If you need that information, no design will stop you. But if your purpose is to educate the general public, someone looking at this won't be able to really find a place for their eyes to easily scan through. This red, even though it looks very pretty, it's the focal point of this piece. So what you read is, what about cancer? And this big red line kind of keeps your eye up here. So you have to force yourself to read through this entire block of text. But if you just let your eyes kind of wander the page, your eyes always want to go back to this line. So those are some of the concepts that are flowing through this piece, even if you didn't really notice it. You can just notice it by just scanning the piece. So this is what the first example of how graphic design can help your nonprofit. The second one is it helps people, and I'm going to add to this part, it helps people understand and remember your message. So here is another example of 2 Canadian churches, and again, I took all of the charity names out of it, but they actually have the same purpose, the same event, is to welcome people who are new to their church. One is, both of them can do what the church wants them to do, but one of them is better designed than the other. So we'll try this again. Which one do you think is better designed? Canadian Church number 1 or Canadian Church number 2? 2? A lot of people say 2. No one for 1?
Yeah.
The spring colors?
Yeah.
You like 1?
Yeah, I like 1.
You like 1 as well?
One, because it's got registered
Yeah,
here.
that's right.
You can click on there and you're in.
And there is the time as well.
And the location.
Yeah.
So,
The information.
a lot of you guys are yes. Sorry.
I think number 2 looks like a condo ad, so especially if you're trying to catch the attention of newcomers, it doesn't necessarily look as inviting.
And those are all fair points. So as you can see, there's already subjective parts kind of injected to this workshop or this presentation. But my vote will be to this one. And I'll give you some reasons. This one, if you're looking for the information, it's definitely all there. I should also give you some of the context. These are things on a website where you can kind of tell. I have already given you the context that this is to welcome newcomers. The issue that I have here is that they actually put too much emphasis on their own branding. So if you're a newcomer, you might not actually know what Next Steps is. Is that for their own members? Is that a program for their members? I don't really know. This one cuts straight to the chase. This is the whole point. You're a newcomer, welcome, have some lunch, this is the day. In terms of color and, I mean, this one definitely gets your attention. The purpose behind both of them could be very different. This one definitely, I can understand that they want this to be really welcoming. They want people to feel warm, they want to know that there's a face to the person, so let's meet that person. This one, it's a little bit removed, like definitely the colors grab your attention, but aside from that, what does it say about welcoming? I guess there's these signs and it points somewhere and then that person is just gone. Which is, again, a design choice. They're both able to succeed, people will still come, but one will give you a very different feel than the other. So again, it helps people understand what this is, your message, and then remember it. The third part is graphic design can help you build your brand personality. So these two are two examples of Acquire website. Again, I guess this one I couldn't really sanitize, and it's okay because there's a good example. Already gave it away. But whether you like this design or not, in terms of brand personality, which one shows you what? And any reasons for that?
They cut to the chase.
Yeah. And there's a lot of elements that are playing in this design that you might not always understand is happening until you sit down and really analyze. With this one, I can tell that they are casual, that they're at least trying to be fun. They're very, like what you said, straight to the point. So if you have any questions, I feel like I know where to go, where to contact. And when I navigate away from this page, what do I remember? Their name. Because that is front and center. It's very bold, it's very eye-catching. Even if you don't agree with this particular web design, that's what you take away from it. Whereas this one, I did have to take away the name, but just imagine there's like black text here. So that, even with that element piece, what do you feel from this design? Yes?
I feel like the first one is Acquire that would sing songs I have heard, and the second is Acquire that would sing songs from the 13th century.
Because the 13th century had websites.
But it's really
Yeah.
formal and heavy
Very formal.
and dark, and lots of links to like their funders. Like that looks like a really heavy, serious evening at the theater.
And that's fair. Did someone else have a comment? Another thing about this is it does look kind of generic. If you had let's say you're trying to find a show, and this is not the only choir that you're considering, and you're going through all the different choir websites, which one will you remember? You will remember the one that looks very different. Very colorful, very direct. This one, and there's nothing wrong with it, but this one does look like a template website. That they just color customize the buttons, and maybe they put in their own logos, and then they put in their own content. But nothing really outstanding. It does come across as professional, but so does every other brand out there. So in terms of how graphic design can be used to even build how people feel about your charity, understand your charity, and interact with your charity, starts with the design. So after looking through these 3 points, now I'm going to get you into the right mindset of how can you take your graphic design elements and take them to the next step. So here I have 5 design principles and techniques that I believe can equip anyone, whether you have a background in art or no background in art at all. If you take these and understand the concepts, you can make good graphic design no matter where you go. There are a ton more design elements and principles, and if this piques an interest for you, definitely go through and research more. But if you are tight on time, tight on budget, these are the 5 go-tos that I would recommend. The first one is a concept of line. And it's not just like a physical line on a page, it's the visual path. Having a visual path on your design will actually help direct the flow of content without you saying, read here, step 1, step 2. Going back to that Canadian health charity where I talked about how the photography, that photograph kind of directs your eye down to the header and the bullet points helps your eye keep moving. That is a visual path. As an example, this is more of like a graphic path, but in this example, there is no line. If you're looking from one tree to another, your eye skips. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you really want to look at the image, you will make that happen. But if you put in a visual path for people, it will be easier to navigate through a page. So that is the concept of line. So the other concept is space, and not just white space, it's positive and negative space. And it's not saying that one is better than the other. It's to understand that this is happening whether you are intentional about it or not. So space really is just things that are taken up by the positive or negative. Positive is used to describe not just the color or anything, it's what the subject of the design piece that you want. So in this example, this tree would be the positive space because this is the object that you want people to focus on. And in the background, that green would be the negative space. The same thing applies here. But as you can see, depending on how you manipulate the negative space, you get very different feels, even though the object is the same. In an area where you don't give a lot of room for the negative space, the eye doesn't know where to rest. They're trying to find all these like little gaps to rest at, but because there's so few and far in between, you feel busy, you feel crowded. If you understand that this is the effect of having really limited negative space, you can actually use this to your advantage. Like if you're doing an ad for poverty or something that is, you're trying to come across like there's a great number of things, you can actually do that by repeating the same elements so it feels really overwhelming. Or if you want people to just focus and like don't worry about all the white noise in between, you focus on the negative space, which is typically called the white space. As I mentioned here, it also defines where your eyes can rest. So if you're not working with graphics, if you're working with text, that's also in play. Not a lot of people understand that, but if you can imagine a Word document and there's margins, changing the width and size of those margins make a huge impact on how your overall piece looks like, because it defines where your eyes are going and where they can have a resting point. So keep those concepts in mind. And anytime I'm not clear with a concept, just shout and let me know. The other concept is a little bit harder to say this is where it ends and where it begins, but it's a concept of harmony. So what harmony is it's supposed to be a visually satisfying effect when you combine similar elements together. And again, that sounds super subjective, so I'm going to point to this example to really emphasize that point. Both of these examples use the same image, the same text, the same number of different fonts, and the same colors in terms of green and brown. But one is more harmonious than the other. So let's just use a show of hands. Who thinks this is more harmonious? And who thinks this one is more harmonious? We're actually kind of split, although more people are leaning towards this. And again, everything's kind of subjective, but people who said this one is harmonious is wrong. And I'll give you the reasons, and that's okay, because we need to learn together. So let me explain. The concept of harmony, actually, there's so many different elements, but if you were to pick down some factors, it would be color palette, font choices, and consistency throughout those two things. In this one, even though the colors are also green, brown, and the number of font differences are the same, this green is more cold, same as this green. So if you look at this tree, this is technically the focus of this entire graphic. This green is more warm, which means there's more red or yellow in these color palettes. The green behind the tree actually has more blue, which is a cold color. So when you put them next to each other, and it could be your personal preference, maybe you like seeing this contrast, but they don't complement each other well. They kind of fight against each other because there's two different types of hues happening. The same with the font choices. Even though there's 3 different fonts, there's 2 font types. There's serif, which means there's no little tails at the end. And then, there's sans serif, which means there's no tails at the end, and then there's serif. So if you look at this very simple phrase, save the trees, the is an article. It's just kind of like connecting the 2 concepts together. This is really the focus of this entire slogan. But you can see that save and trees, they're not different. I mean, they're different font types. One is sans serif and this one is serif. So in a way, save and the has more in common than trees. So again, like I'm explaining like really nitty-gritty stuff, but some people might not pick up on this, but some people might. So when you're talking about harmonious aspects, this one is more harmonious because the green background is more warm. There's more yellow or red tones in it, so it matches the same palette as the tree. The font choices, even though it's still 3 different types of fonts, the save and the trees are both sans serif. In the article, the is serif. Yes?
Good question. Are the trees the same color in both things?
Yes.
Because they totally don't look, like if you see them next to each other, they don't.
They
They don't look the same at all.
Yeah, and it depends on like the background color. And because of the hues, it can bring out the tree more or make it look more muted. So in this one is more harmonious, but again, it depends on what your goal is. If you want that discord, this one would work. If you want something that's a little bit more harmonious, this one would be a better image. Any questions?
Is there an easy way to tell which colors fall under the norm and which fall under the construction to make it kind of just pick 3 on this side or pick 10 on this side?
The easiest way, and this is kind of a cheating, in Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, when you pick a font color, they have like the default like little square palettes that you can choose from. Even if you choose one from there, if you go to more font colors, it brings up the color wheel. The ones that are closer to the blue are colder. The ones that are closer to the yellow and the reds are warmer. So you can kind of choose in between. So that's like the really easy, hacky way to do it. If you wanted the more techie way, if you love hex codes, you can also look up the hex code and see where it falls on the color wheel on that.
I attended a presentation in regards to colors and things like that, and the presenter said if you go to Google and type in color palettes or matching color palettes or whatever, it will give you
Yeah, no, Google's a definitely like go-to resource for anything, not just graphic design. But yeah, there are other color kind of like palette choices. There's a lot of websites that actually put them together for you. So even if they're not like all green or all brown, they actually put together palettes for you that will work well together, and then you can go from there.
So this aspect of harmony, are we saying that it's important to offer harmony in a presentation? Or are we saying, depending on the audience that your agency is trying to engage, you may or may not wish to consider harmony?
Yeah, so this concept is to try to visualize this really abstract concept of harmony, but it really depends on your goal. If you're trying to, let's say, reach out to newcomers and you want them to like join you, welcome them, you don't want something that's really disjointed. You want something that's very harmonious, really welcoming and warm. But if you're trying to get across a concept that is not like maybe controversial, maybe you're doing like a political campaign and you really want to hit home the point, then this is something that you need to be aware of. You might be intentionally breaking the harmony so you can get a point across. But whether you go with one or the other, if you're not aware of it, you might be committing things that are going against your goal. That's the whole point of this principle. Not saying that you have to design everything harmoniously, but these 2 things are a factor, are in play, whether you intend for it or not. So now that we're talking about techniques, so there's a little bit black and white. There's this word called kern, and kern basically refers to the spacing between each character for each letter or each character. Kerning then is the process of adjusting that spacing. The good thing to know when it comes to kerning is that it can be done whether you have a design program or not, and I'll show you how. Another thing to understand is that all the different font faces like Arial, Calibri, Times New Romans, Garamond, they all have their own different types of kerns. So this one, I believe I use, I think, okay, I don't remember. It was all of the things, all the examples I have, they're all default fonts. So you can always go back and see whether you can match design. But this one is normal kerning. So this is just standard font. This is the designer's own kerning. I just left it as is. The top is I expanded it. So it looks a little bit different. And at the bottom I condensed it. So as you can see there, and I also should note that all of these are the same font, the same font size. The only difference is the way I kerned it. The tip here is that a well-kerned font, if you want something that is aesthetically pleasing, easy to read, the kerning has to be visually similar. Not exactly the same. And the reason behind that is if you look at this one, all of these letter spacings are exactly the same, but the T touches the H, but the H does not touch the E. And the reason behind that is each character, an S or an A or a V, they're different widths. For obvious reasons, like V is a little bit wider than the T. So if I make them exactly the same, it actually doesn't turn out very well. Which is why when the designer made the font, they take that into account. When you're designing your own piece, just know that you can stick with the default kern, but you can also make up your own. I don't want to say make up your own, you can adjust it. And many times you might actually want to adjust it to achieve the goal that you want. For example, this, it expands it so it's easier to read. It comes across as like very grand, very soft. This one is like very condensed, really fast. It's a little bit too busy. But again, depending on what your goal is, you might want to go with one or the other. So here's the concept of kerning.
Can you change the kerning in Word?
Yes. So I'll show you how later. So again, these are grand concepts, and we'll dig into with more practical examples later. So the last, the fifth technique is called line height, or the concept of line spacing. So this one seems kind of like a no-brainer, like why would I be interested in that? But this can really change your design world. So the spacing refers to the literal space between the lines of text. And there's two, well technically three ways that it will come into play. It can be done uniformly throughout the entire text. So no matter whether it's a new paragraph or not, it's the same. Or you can specify the ones that are before or after. So in this example, these two sample texts is the exact same font type, font face, font size. I even try to match it exactly, but one is easier to look at than the other. And the only difference between these two is the line height. This one is standard. I just left it as is, and I did a space or an enter right here. This one, I made the line height slightly up, like under 1, and then I put this one with a line height before it, line spacing before it, to be like 16 points. So then this is actually not an enter space, it's literally just the spacing before this paragraph. So that's a concept of line height. Any questions so far?
Yeah. So what do you achieve by doing it?
Pardon?
What do you achieve by these different methods?
It helps people understand how to read your, or sorry, not understand, it helps people easily read your content. If you have something, like imagine this, but in like 5 pages. So, and there's times where if you just put a complete enter, let's say you have a subpoint. So you don't, a complete enter denotes that it's a complete different point. But let's say you don't want a complete different point, but you want to break it up. With line, if you actually manipulate the line spacing, you can get it more precise than just a complete line break. And these are all kind of like, oh, you know, fancy principles, and how do you actually enter it practically? So I'm going to show you an example, and then we'll go through it together. So fair warning, this is a real example. I promise I did not make it up just for the purpose of this presentation. I did take the charity name out of it, but it's a poster. So this is a poster by a Canadian charity, and it's live, it's used, and I'm sure it's doing well. But for this purpose of this workshop, we want to look at this and go through the 5 things I told you guys about, and then take this poster and transform it into something that is a little bit better designed. So going from the first principle, which is, I kind of forgot, so I have to go back. Yeah, good job. So the first principle is line, visual path. So I'm going to survey the room. What is the first thing you see on this poster? You can just shatter it.
Gears.
What do you see?
I see the blue gear or the green gear.
You see
Yeah,
this?
that gear.
Okay.
The blue gear in the center.
You see this. Anyone else? What does your eye immediately go to?
Shame. No.
There's no wrong answers.
The green gear.
The green?
Yeah.
I've noticed that no one actually said the actual conference name, which is unfortunate because that's supposed to be the main focus of this poster. But that's fine, that's just how it's designed. So the next one I'm going to help. I need some help. What's the second principle? Space. So the concept of positive and negative spaces. So in this one, what is the prime object?
Information.
The information? The gears. Any other thoughts? What do you see as like the main element? It could be just one of the gears too.
Middle gear.
The middle gear?
The biggest gear, yeah.
Okay. The next concept is harmony. So the concept of everything kind of either being disjointed or working well together to come up with a visually pleasing effect.
They're using like 5, maybe 6 different fonts, it seems like.
You notice each little gear is a different font, which is a great design element. It can work for some cases, yes.
Each gear has its own thing, except the middle gear, which has 3 things.
Fair, yeah. Although you can argue on. I know what you mean.
The balance, so the balance is tons of white space at the bottom and on the left-hand side.
So you feel like there's lack of balance in the heart
And the overall.
of all the different elements. I saw one more feedback. Want to share? Okay. So the concept of kerning and line height, I will just skip to the chase. Obviously, they didn't modify anything. So if you were working at this charity and you see this poster and they say like, can you just like take a few days to do pretty it up? Using the 5 elements, let's say you don't have like additional clip art, you don't have really nice fonts, you don't have Adobe Photoshop. Taking the 5 elements, you're gonna transform this poster into something else. So I'm gonna do the work for you and say that going from this, you can get to this. So not saying that this is the best design ever. This is just taking this design, applying the 5 principles and techniques, and coming up with this. So now I'll kind of break it down so you can see how the 5 things, I guess, work together to come up with a new design. So the first thing about visual path. So I noticed that everyone had a different answer. You were like, I looked at this, I looked at the nursery care. People talk about the gears, but the really most important thing is that it's a family conference. People want to, if you want to go to a conference, it's good to know what the topics are, but that is not the prime focus. So in terms of building a line, a visual path for your audience, you want to direct them without actually saying, read here first, then here, then here. What you do with that is you put it front and center, and you make it really big with the highest contrast. There's different ways you can do it. This is just the way that I chose to do it. The second part is, I'm forgetting my own principles after line, is space. So you guys talked about how there's different focuses. It could be the gears, it could be the information. You can't go, there's no right and wrong, you just gotta pick one. And I picked both. So the prime object, the positive space, should be the gears and information. But the only way to do that is you have to have a different color to make everything pop. If this was white, this entire thing will look like it's just lost in space. If you just pick a slightly different color, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, it actually makes a difference. Now you can tell that the gears and information are positive objects. This light blue is the negative space. And you can play around with it, you can flip it around. But in either case, it actually draws more attention and it makes the piece more concise. So the third principle is harmony. So going back to like, it's kind of subjective, but you have to be intentional about it. I know that this is a family conference, so I'm intentionally trying to make it harmonious because it's for family, it's for kids. I don't want them to like feel like they're disjointed and battling it. And the colors, it doesn't really matter, but for rules of thumb, if you want something to be harmonious, stick with a limited color palette so it doesn't look like you're skipping everywhere. It also makes your life easier that you're only picking between like 3 or 4 things. So I picked these 3 colors. So if you notice, the background is just a different shade of blue. All the information in the gears matches the gear, so there's no there's nothing kind of conflicting there as well. And now the 2 other principles are a little bit more like techniques, so kerning and line height. So with all of these, the only way that I've modified the spaces is with line spacing and kerning. So with gear up and conferences, those are sort of my header pieces. So I kerned them a little bit tighter so they look more like the way that you would read a logo. So you don't really read them as text, you read them almost like a graphic text image. For these pieces that are more informational, I left them standard kerning. And then with the line spacing, I don't know if you can see here, but I basically put a little bit more space between the header and the information that describes the header. And then this one, because there is no header for it, I just made the line spacing a little bit closer together so it doesn't look so disjointed as it does here or here. $5 space family. It's a little bit disjointed if you leave it at the default line spacing. Another concept of line that I forgot to mention, aside from getting more attention to the gear up, which is the family conference, is you can actually use the gears to create a visual path without actually drawing lines. Because I wanted this to be the focus. Your eyes are drawn here first, but where do I want you to go to next? I wanted you to go here, so I made this gear almost like it's going to touch this gear, but it fits perfectly like a jigsaw. So hopefully your eyes will land here and then here naturally, even though there's no line. I've also purposely made these 2 colors in the background color cold colors, whereas this one is warm. Your eyes are actually more drawn towards warm colors that are of warm hues. So even though your eyes for the North American audience actually go to left to right, I made you go right to left. But I still want you to read this, so then these 2 gears actually kind of parallel together, so then it creates almost another line, so it's a triangle. So that's another element of visual path. So that's how you can take all the 5 things that I've mentioned previously and apply it at any design. So you don't, and I should also mention this is made in PowerPoint. I didn't use anything. These shapes are standard shapes so this is actually an actual gear shape in PowerPoint that you can resize any way you want. And this is just a sphere, like a circle shape, and I just put them on top of each other. So any questions on how you can apply these principles?
I was going to say, did you send the organization your version?
No. I actually didn't tell the organization I'm using their image. So that will be a secret between us and the entire internet.
For 1,000 bucks each. Or amounts received.
Yeah. So April 25th, remember, family conference. Okay, so then now that you have the principles, now you can see how you use it. I'm going to give you some tips on how to use Office programs to do this. So 7 tips. The first one is character spacing. I know you talked about kerning, but the same, line spacing. So we're going to start with kerning. Character spacing can be found in Word and PowerPoint when you select a font or a sentence and you right-click. So in Word, you go navigate to font, and it's in the Advanced tab, and the options are right there. The same thing for PowerPoint. It looks a little bit different, but they essentially have 3 options. You can stick with the normal kerning, you can expand it, and then here you can customize by how many points. Normal kerning is usually 1 point, so if you go above that, it will just expand it enormously, and then if you want to condense it, it's the same concept. So that's how you would do it, but how does it look like in practice? So here's an example of, again, the same image, the same text, same font size, same font, but different kerning. And again, nothing is right or wrong, but depending on your goal, what you want to come across, one can actually be more effective than the other. So let's say you are an environmental charity and you want to come across as very expansive, you want people to know that you have a lot of land and you want everyone to protect. So this one does get your message across, protect our lands. But with standard kerning, it's very tight. It actually comes across as a little bit like too direct. Like, you protect our lands now, like, especially because this is like all caps. If you want to soften the message, you can actually kern it so it's expanded, so it's a little bit softer. So think of this more like the softer ass, like protect our lands. Like, this is very long. You can get that point across with kerning. The same thing could happen if I condense this and it'll make it sound like it's very, or feel like it's really busy. That would be actually a good tactic for people who are trying to promote good city building. If you feel like your city's not building correctly and everything's just all jam-packed, you can actually condense your font so it feels really, really tight. So that's how you do character spacing in Word and PowerPoint. Next one is line spacing. You can, I talked about how you can be a little bit more precise, so this is my suggestion. You can feel free to find your own balance point. But you would navigate to the paragraph the same way you would navigate to character spacing. You will select the sentence, right-click, but instead of going to font, you'll go to paragraph, the same thing in PowerPoint. And then under paragraph, you will go into spacing. And then line spacing, I suggest going with multiple because it allows you to be really precise. Multiple means it's not, okay, I actually don't know what it means, but basically you can actually change the value here so it's condensed or expanded. Whereas if you go with like single, 1.5, double, it just expands everything. So multiple actually gives you more flexibility on whether you want your line spacing short or line spacing very long. So now you might think like, well, why would I bother doing this? So let's say that you are a nonprofit and you have an annual general meeting. A portion of that is you want to encourage your staff to come out and meet the board. So it's a board meet and greet. So for this one, again, exactly the same image, exactly the same design elements, fonts, font size, font type. The only difference is line spacing. This one is very expansive. The information is just kind of like, wow, here it is. As a staff member, I read this, I'm like, oh, like my eyes have to skip from like one really poorly spaced paragraph to another, and then, I don't know. It might stick with me, it might not. This one, it actually condenses it. So the line spacing here, it's I think like line spacing multiple at 0.7. So it's very, very close. This one actually works very well with the image, so all the key information actually cuts off right at the spoon. So there's really nice negative space for the positive space, which is the text. Again, you can prefer one over the other, but if you want to really be intentional about it, keep that in mind that you can navigate your pieces even if you don't have the right graphic tools to help you. The next one is text boxes. Everyone knows text boxes. I don't need to explain what it is. But the thing is, a lot of people use them, maybe not to the fullest potential. I always recommend going with transparent, so which means no outline, and I really stress no outline, and then no background color. And when I say unanchored, I meant for text boxes, you can actually define whether you want it to wrap around the text, whether you want it to be in line with the paragraph, and that's just how it relates to other text elements.
For the people that are online, could you tell us, could you specify if you're talking about the image on the left or right?
I haven't gone to the image yet,
yeah.
But this image here uses a text box and this one does not.
Sorry, that's the image on the right?
Oh, sorry, the image on the right. The image on the right uses text boxes and the image on the left does not.
Thank you.
So text boxes, when I say unanchored, I mean the text box is a free element. You can move it anywhere you want without disrupting the text. The way to do this in Word and PowerPoint is it needs to be like text wrap under, behind or in front of text. So you can have a picture in line with your paragraphs, but then it messes up your whole formatting. That's just how Word is. With unanchored text boxes, it gives you more flexibility in your positioning. So for example, as a nonprofit, I want to write handwritten thank you notes, but I can't do that all the time. I want to use a program to kind of imitate that. People know that it's not my writing, but I want it to still come across as like fun, you know, like I'm personally writing this to you. So here I just randomly took a background image of a paper. It might not be the great example, but this is the one that's actually in Word, so I'll just use that. And I used like a script font, so it imitates handwritten font. This is also default, it's freestyle. And this one is just Calibri, so all standard fonts. This one is just a standard text, and I just put the image behind it. So standard line height, everything is, I didn't adjust the kerning at all. Same thing here. The only difference is a thank you is in a text box. So if I could go into PowerPoint and select this, you will see that the text box is slanted because I've adjusted it so then the thank you goes a little bit, like if you can follow the line, it touches sort of this forward part and it goes upwards. Because when you're writing a note to someone, I'm pretty sure you're not going to write really straight. So to kind of give that impression that I've handwritten this, I just slanted it a bit. And again, there's nothing wrong with either two designs, but this one does come across as a little bit more casual and a little bit more like, thank you. And this one is just like, thank you. So that's what you can do with text boxes. So this one is kind of combining everything I just said and just adding another element, which is photos. Because at a nonprofit, you might have your own photos. Maybe you found a really great public domain photo that you want to use, and you want to find a way to input it into your design. So this one is created completely in PowerPoint. And so the image on the left is completely designed completely in PowerPoint. And then the image on the right, I've just broken down the elements to show you how you can come up with the design in PowerPoint or in Word. It's sort of the same function. So the analogy that I want you to, I guess, think of is you start with a design you want. Don't be limited by your program. And then from there, see what you can do in the program to imitate that. So here, I started not with, I'm going to design in PowerPoint. I started with, what design do I want? I want something modern, I want something sleek, these are the colors I want. And I found a photo that is, again, public domain, and I want to design this piece. So then, I don't have Adobe Photoshop, so I open PowerPoint. How do I get from the design in my mind to this? I know that I have transparent text boxes, I can use line spacing, I can use kerning, and shapes. So, and photos. So here, this is the photo. I just cropped it. You can crop things in PowerPoint and Word. This is a shape with a transparent gradient. You can do that again in PowerPoint or Word. This is a text box, and when I said no outline, here's an outline. When I say no outline, it's like don't start with that outline unless you intend to have an outline around your text box. So this is sort of like that popular, really trendy look of being really modern, like here's a little space, like wow, professional. So you can imitate that with a text box. Just ensure that the spacing, again, is, you can actually edit that as margins, or you can just ensure that this is center aligned and then you can just manipulate the box yourself. These four elements are text boxes, transparent, no outline, no background. And these two are just rectangular shapes with no outline. So they appear like flat elements. And then I just combine them together using these two as the background and then just piling everything on top. So that's how you can arrive at this design without using InDesign or Photoshop. So just know that you can insert photos, but just remember to start with the design and see how you can use your program to arrive to that design.
With no background at all in graphic design, I'm interested in the thinking in the right-hand piece of the box in the top right-hand corner.
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the thinking?
So this photo, as is, so the only thing I've done with the photo is I cropped it. But when I put the text elements on top of it, it was too bright. So you can do you can do like brightness and contrast, but it's kind of limited. Like you can't really edit it into like granular details. So the hack around that is I just created a shape that is darker with a gradient and just layered it on top. So if you have experience with other graphic design softwares like Adobe Photoshop, there's a concept of layers. You have one layer that will go on top of another, and you can see how they would be combined as one object. You can do the same thing in PowerPoint, it's just you don't see every separate layer. Everything's just blah on one page. So the concept here is when I put the white text here, you can see this light is very, very white. You couldn't read the title of the event. And after going through all the options that came with the program, it still didn't address my needs, so I just created a gradient box to go over it, to just mute it down.
Can you tell us how to create a gradient box?
Yeah, without going into a PowerPoint, when you create a box, a shape, it comes default with a standard background and an outline. So when you go into outline, you just take that over here, just say no outline. And then when you go into content to the shape fill, there's actually a little option similar, so it won't be this exactly, but similar to this in the top menu, it will say gradient. So when you go to gradient, you can edit it in, I guess, I don't have a screenshot of the panel, so it would bring up another menu where you can define what the colors are and the transparency levels. And you can also define how many stops, which is how many colors you want. So in this one, the entire gradient is just black. If I wanted to make that rainbow, I can. You can just add in more colors, or you can remove colors as needed. It's a little bit more intuitive than the way I'm describing it, because it sounds like it's a lot. But it's a preset menu that you can customize. Any other questions? Okay. So the next 3 tips are, yes?
Question from live stream. If you layer the gradient box on top of the picture, do you have to adjust anything to have the picture show through?
So the gradient, that's a great question. The gradient box, I've made it transparent at the bottom. You can't quite tell because my background for the PowerPoint presentation is gray, but this starts off black, and this color at the bottom is also black, but I made it transparent 100%. So then it shows through exactly. So then when I put the image, the shape on top of the photo, I don't have to adjust anything for the photo, it will come through itself, because I've said that the bottom gradient is see-through, essentially. And again, that's just a way I've done it. There's multiple things that you can do to achieve the same effect, but that's one way. That answers your question, live stream audience. So the next 3 tips are really granular per program. The first one is Excel. Everyone has used Excel graphs, and this is more because there are a lot of infographic tools online. I would definitely recommend you going there first. But if you don't want to, because either like your internet connection is poor, or your nonprofit is just like so strict, they block every site except your own, so you can't access those, don't worry, you can still use Excel. The key here is to know when some elements are too much. So for example, these are the same graphs, but one graph is just a default setting. I just put in my data and I just click generate, and there it is. The other graph I modified significantly. So Excel, as much as people like to harp on it, it is a really amazing program. They have a lot of functionality already built in. Same thing for the graphs, which is not something that a lot of people understand. You can actually change a lot of things like line color, font sizes, each bar graph could be a different color. You can go nuts. But as a starting point, the tip here is if you want to create really modern looking graphs, and this is what is key for, let's say, your fundraising campaigns or your annual reports, where you want to give your supporters statistics, but you don't want to paralyze them. You don't want to paralyze them with them. So for example here, I just very generically put, what are the components of TechSoup Canada? I put 60% tech, 10% soup, and 30% Canada. But there's a lot of things happening in this chart. There's a legend, there's that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I put this in an annual report that already kind of explains what it is, it could be a little bit information overload or just repeating information. The graph on the right is a little bit more modern because I removed a lot of the elements that is not needed. If I'm going to include this in an annual report, I'm pretty sure I'm going to describe what this graph is telling our supporters, so I don't need to repeat the same information. This is really just for them to reference if they want more information. So here, again, the same graph, is just I deleted some elements and then I just made the bars wider. I adjusted the legend, so instead of like taking your finger and going, is that 30% or is that 25%? I just put the number straight in. Again, these are all standard features of Excel. The next one is Word. This is a huge hack, so be cautious with it because it could make your files really big. The hack here is if you want a background image for a file, whether it's an article or a case for support, but you don't want it to interrupt your body text, and you want it to be consistent throughout all your pages, you can put background images in the header and footer section, make them so it's a word wrap behind text, and then just leave it. So this here is where I'm putting just a photo, two shapes with transparency set to 25%. So you can kind of see the image coming through, but when they're overlaid, it's very, very light, so then you can still read what the text is. I put that under header footer. I made it so it's word wrap behind text, and then I just closed header footer and I just wrote. I just started writing. It doesn't interrupt this. I can enter as many times as I want. I can do so many page breaks as I want. It won't move these elements. The good thing about this is if you want to send, you created a great image of an annual report and you want to send it to all your staff across the country to use. But you know that they might struggle with design pieces, or maybe they want to input a lot of images and it would move these images around. You can put into the header footer so they don't touch it, and they can create as many pages as they want, but this element will be consistent. Another hack around this is you can set whether it's an image for an even page or an odd page, so then you can have mirroring designs. So a practical example is, I'll use my own. At the last place I worked at, for our case for support, we didn't use an image quite this large, but we had, like those really trendy squirrels, like, ooh, like wave marks. So I took that, I just flipped it, so then for even and odd pages, they're mirroring images, but that was actually really great polishing piece for our case for supports, because if you look at, so if you imagine that this is a report for a funder, remove the background image, it's just a white background. God knows how many grantees that you've already given money. You want them to really understand the impact. You want them to renew their support next year. You want to make an impression. So even just putting like a really, really simple background image will make them feel more connected to your piece. Remember, you're a nonprofit, so next year when you apply, they will give you the grant. Any questions about this? Okay, so last tip, and this is going to be a mouthful, is PowerPoint. So in PowerPoint, there's a feature where you can create your own slide deck. It's called Slide Master. So all of their templates that you use have their own slide master. So then when you create a new slide, that's where you can set whether it's a title slide, an image slide, a text slide, the works. And depending on the template, they could have only like 2 templates or 3 or more. So this one is a default template, but as you can see under the slide master view, there are 3 different designs that you can choose from. So when you create your PowerPoint presentation, you can choose from just a plain standard brown background, or you can create like this nice green background or this nice blue background. But it's only there as options. They're not just populated for you from the get-go. The neat thing about Slide Master is you can actually customize the size. So it's not just always for PowerPoint. They actually understand that people will hack their programs anyways. So they actually put in all these default sizes for print. There's letter size, ledger paper, 11 by 17, and you can you can customize your own style. So that's say you want to create postcards, and you want to be really edgy, but you want one to be really calm, professional, and both of them are on brand. It's really up to the volunteer to choose which one they want. You can create a custom size for a postcard, create your designs in Slide Master, save it, send that to your volunteer, and so then when they open the file, they can pick which one they want. The neat thing about Slide Master is everything that you can think of in a PowerPoint presentation is within your control. You can set whether things are editable sections, which things aren't. So let's say you are at a really large nonprofit and you want to make sure people use your logo properly. You want to make sure you're introduced properly, your stats are all up to date. You don't want people saying, our nonprofit served over like tens of thousands of people, and then other people say, we've only served over 20. You want to make sure all the messaging is consistent. You can create a slide deck that has its own text that is not editable, except if you go into Slide Master. So when people choose intro slide, all the text is already populated. So as an example, I'm gonna scroll all the way back to the beginning, but this is our slide deck. All the things that I have here are things that I obviously created for this workshop, but all of our intro pieces, such as Net Squared, this piece, our Texas Global Community, the Technology Donations Program, these are all in the Slide Master as text that are not editable. So when I send this to anyone in my staff, they don't need to change this. Even if they do, they can't, when they select intro slides, they can't change it. They can only change it on the Slide Master. So that's a kind of a hacky way to make sure that all of your messaging and design elements are consistent. Again, it's a hack, so it's not 100% perfect. If they figure out that they can edit it, if they go into Slide Master, then they can do that. But generally, a lot of nonprofit staff, they don't know that it's there. So just going back to our current slide. So for Slide Master, some of the things that this can be used for is if you are putting together an annual report that needs to be collaborated with so many staff members, board members, your chapter president, you have staff, program staff internally, your program staff remotely, you're sending the same file over and over again. That's so you can create a page for a new report section saying all of our funders and supporters, and then you can create a slide that has 2 columns that they can use to just list everyone that supported them. Then your next one is about your impact. So then you can take this blue one saying this is the new report section that you use to talk about our impact. So not about our supporters, that's this color. I want you to use blue to talk about our cause. So when you send them the file, they don't have to try to recreate your design from scratch. They can just say new slide and then right click, choose the one that you set for them. You can also rename these pieces. The default is always like intro slide, text slide, picture slide, but you can rename them. So this one could be cause, this one could be body paragraph, and this one could be supporters. So then when they right click and try to choose a slide that is most appropriate, you can guide them along with the titles. So that is the last tip, and I want to open the floor for questions. There's a lot more things that could be covered, but I just want to take some of the information from here to you without being too overwhelming. Yes?
I have a question, and it's more kind of conceptual and maybe a bit of branding, but just because you got me thinking about it. So I promote talks, panel discussions, or two-person conversation with on a monthly basis. So on a monthly basis, I keep the template pretty much the same. So now that you've got me thinking about it, I'm thinking I should obviously keep some elements the same, obviously not a logo, kind of branding, some of the fonts I don't want to fiddle too much with. But I'm just trying to think of, in terms of the month-to-month, how much flexibility, in terms of consistent messaging and what people are willing to accept for, some are regular attendees and others are not, obviously, but how much can I play around creatively? Like I saw the night market one is kind of what I strive for, that kind of modern sleep, but I'm not very advanced in my understanding of a lot of these, the tools I have. So I can't even create something that wonderful. But so I'm just trying to, like, if I want to use something like that, you think the night market image, but I wanted to have some room to maneuver, kind of keep the branding the same. Would you kind of keep all the fonts, the elements the same, and maybe kind of play around with the size of the photos of the panelists that we're speaking with? I'm just trying to figure out how much wiggle room I have to be creative without turning people off and thinking, who is this doing this?
No, for sure. And you touched on a lot of great points. We'll start off by saying branding guidelines is definitely something that if your nonprofit doesn't have right now, you should do. Having a branding guideline just defines what your brand persona is and how do you encompass that visually. So if you want to come up as professional, most likely you don't want to use Comic Sans. If you want to come off as fun and creative, you might want to go more towards sans serif fonts because they're less academic than serif fonts. So for you, if you don't have a branding guideline, I would start there. And really, like, the world is your oyster. You can set as many rules or as little rules as you want, but the key is you have to be consistent. So you talked about the design of the night market. This is actually, I will be very straight up, this design was ripped from another source. So I didn't include in these slides some of the sources that you can go to. I'll just list them now. A huge source is canva.com. A lot of people heard of them. They're an
What is that?
Canva.com. So CANVA.com. So this is an online browser app that is sort of like an image editing tool. They come up, they have pre-populated clip art. I don't want to say clip art, but that's the easiest way to describe them in this context. Basically icons, background images. You can select your own solid colors. They kind of come as a prepackaged deal. Some of them are premium images, some of them aren't. But what's really great about them and what a lot of nonprofits like is they come with a lot of templates. So they would create like a template like this, you would select it, and then you can go in and change whatever you want. So let's say you wanted to use a picture of a person instead of just a location, you can upload your own image. You can change the color of the blocks, etc. For this particular case, I use them more as inspiration. If I look at a template, I'm like, that's a really nice template, it's free. I want to recreate it so my other staff members can edit. Because the issue with Canva is like you create your account and your designs kind of live in your account. So if you were working with more than just yourself, it might be harder to share the same design through Canva. You can recreate it in another program that is easily shareable. So going back to where do you set your limits? It depends on your own taste, and then starting from there, be consistent. If you want something like this, then I'm assuming that you wanted something a little bit more modern, a little bit more simple, minimalistic. So those are the things that you will write into your branding guidelines. Things like the nitty-gritty parts of like how big your logo can be, what color it can be. You can definitely set those. Some people have things like, I don't want my logo slanted. Like the best example is a Twitter bird. They only want people to use that blue or the white. You can't actually change the Twitter bird to purple or yellow. That's off-brand for them. So those are some of the things that you might want to work into your branding guidelines as well. So assuming that you have everything and you have sort of an outline of how you want your entire organization to feel like, then as long as you're within those confines, you can do whatever you want. This image here, it might seem like the photo is what's kind of making it all modern and classy, but if I replace this with a really nice palette of just a solid color, it could be equally modern. Like let's say, maybe not yellow because it's really contrast, but maybe the background is like a really solid color, let's say like a light green. And I make these black, I'm done. And then it's the same feel, but instead of using a photograph, I'm just using a color. But it's still within the same branding guidelines of being focusing on white space, the negative space around it, being minimalistic and being modern. Does that kind of answer your question?
A few questions from live stream. Folks are wondering if you have any good resources, or websites, or even some books about graphic design hacks, and specifically about where to get some good download free pictures.
So I will start with the pictures because it's the easiest. There are a number of great websites and just kind of gathering of resources for public domain pictures. So this means they're free for anyone to use, commercial, non-commercial, you don't have to attribute. The biggest one I use because it's searchable is pixels.com, which is spelled PEXELS.com, Pixels.
Will you be sending some to
Yes, I can.
those that haven't jotted anything down?
No worries. We also at the beginning we're like, we're gonna take notes, so we're gonna do that, and I'll list all the resources. But pixels.com is a big one. There's another one called Unsplash. Again, it's not searchable, but it's just a curation of all the images that are free in public domain. They're all high res and amazing. All the pictures that you've seen here is either taken from Pixels or Unsplash. All the, like this is also from Pixels. that is from Pixels. I love Pixels.
And that's
Well, that is from PowerPoint. But the trees, this is from Canva. So this is a free icon. I just took it from Canva. Another hack is if you see something that you like and you can't right click and save and it's free, you can just print a screen, plop that into Paint, and then copy that image. And then there you go, you have your image. Again, be careful with that because if it is by attribution, don't do that.
And that's /UNSPLASA.
Yes, or .com.
.com.
And once you start looking into those public domain websites, they will kind of link to each other. Another popular one, if you want to go for like the edgy, professional, techie stock photo, is called startupstock.com. It's spelled exactly the way it sounds like, startup, stock, no spaces. And it's all the images of just like people working. It's like IMAX everywhere, very, very hip. A lot of orange backgrounds. But again, public domain, all free. You can use it for commercial or non-commercial uses. And other resources for graphics, I do recommend Canva because they have a huge selection of free icons. Those ones that you can download as a JPEG or you can screenshot it. Another one that I would use but be very careful with is called Noun Project. One word, N-O-U-N project.com. It's basically a bunch of like these black and I guess most of them are black icons that people can use to get their point across. A lot of them are for attribution. Like if you want to use an icon, you need to attribute the right artist. But a lot of them are also public domain. So if you click on one that you like and it says CC0, which is public domain, you can use that.
You can also use Creative Commons image search.
Creative Commons, yes, that's a really
But
good.
usually you have to attribute as well.
There's archive.org has the publisher archives. So it's all just like photos from like researchers, academics, anything that was just done in America and is now in the public domain. So if you wanted photos of like people during the Depression or like old phone equipment or just like that kind of kitschy stuff, and it's just archive.org and just search by photo and it will bring everything up and it shows the attribution.
Perfect. And all of these resources that we're mentioning now, like you don't need any additional rights on your computer to use them. But if you do, if you can download and install things, there's Font Squirrel, which is a great resource if you want customized fonts. Like everything that I used here, they're all default fonts. But if you really want to get creative and you see a font that's online and you love, fontsquirrel.com is a collection of all the free fonts that you can download and install on your computer, and you can use that for your designs.
I'm not hearing the second word, fonts.
Squirrel.
Squirrel.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the icon's a little squirrel, so you know you're in the right place. And then I know this is for people who don't have the right tools, but let's say that someone comes across and say like, hey, we have this version of Adobe Photoshop, do you want it? Like, please take it. Just because you don't really know all the features of the program doesn't mean you should like not touch it. So if you do have Adobe Photoshop or any of the Photoshop suites, there's a bunch of great sites that have templates for those programs that you can download and then edit right in those programs. One of my favorites is called freebiesbug. So there's freebiesbug.com, one word, and they have like Photoshop templates for website UI elements, which is just user interface. There's menus, there's submenus, there's buttons. They have icons that you can resize and color yourself. A lot of background images, vector art that you can use.
Are there any decent, easy to use free alternatives to Photoshop?
So if you can't download and install, we actually do have a blog piece about all the different elements, so we'll send that around. But specifically for graphic design, if you can't download and install, GIMP is the next best thing. And if you're used to the Photoshop interface, you can download like a modification of that, so then when you install it, it looks just like Photoshop. And it's really, really powerful for an open source program. It's pretty much the same, just different user interface default, but you can change that. If you can't download or install If you can't download or install programs, there's browser applications. Canva is one of them. I would really recommend using them. The other one is called Pixlr. So it's pixlr.com. And that one is like Photoshop light. They have layers. You can do pretty much everything that any standard day-to-day nonprofit staff would want to do in Photoshop. You can do that in Pixlr. And it's a browser actually.
If you go to our site and click on help and support, at the bottom of the page is a list of a couple different of those resources and links and things like that. So just if you order it.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
And this presentation will of course also be on the
Yes. Yes. The recording will be posted, and then the notes, along with all the resources, will be sent to Meetup, to the Meetup group, but also posted online. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. If there's left over, please feel free to take it, so that we don't have to finish it afterwards. Great. Bye. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.